And the rest of us, I'm going to start the meeting, which is the Communities in Place Overview and Scrutiny meeting on Wednesday, the 16th of September, at various locations across the county. The first item on the agenda will be apologies for absence. And I think Nicola said there was 2, was that right?
Chair, we have apologies for absence from Rick O'Farrell, and Glenn Sanderson is hoping to attend, but he is in another meeting at 2 o'clock.
Okay, so we'll look forward to Glenn's contribution later on. So from there, we shall move to disclosure of members' interests. You only have to disclose something if it's not recorded elsewhere. I take it we're all happy with that. And then we've got the forward plan of cabinet decisions. I don't know whether Sean wants to say anything about that. I don't think there's anything that concerns us, is there?
There are no items that concern the committee at the moment, although we are expecting something on curbside glass collection scheme coming through for the next meeting, but that hasn't been confirmed yet, Chair.
Excellent, and that's more difficult to say than you think, isn't it? And the only thing that I realise it hasn't got anything to do with us, but sort of climate change seems to have slipped down the council's agenda quite a bit, even though it's rocketing up the world's agenda. So I hope at some point we're going to be re-engaging with that whole climate emergency thing.
Yeah, if you remember, Chair, the climate change was considered by the Corporate Services Scrutiny Committee in December, to which all other Scrutiny Committee members were invited. So when this goes to Cabinet on the 13th of October, it will be that committee that pre-scrutinises it on the 12th.
Excellent, thank you. And we shall now go back to the minutes that I completely forgot about. So I've got the minutes of the 15th of July. I take it we've all read it and we're all happy that I signed them.
Chair, can I just bring a point?
Yeah, of course you can, Brian.
On page 3, the adult social care, an adoption of new operating model to support hospital discharges and other additional supports for this essential service. I wonder if we could get some feedback and a little bit more information about that. I know it's been portrayed and delivered to our committee, but it's just a bit of more information I would like to see through the minutes.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, Sean and then Alan.
Yeah, just to say, if your members remember, the recovery report presented by the Chief Executive went to all 4 different committees, the scrutiny committees, and you all had the opportunity to raise issues across the whole of the report rather than issues just within your remit. It is anticipated that a further recovery report will be going to all 4 scrutiny committees probably in the November round. So we expect that a lot of the questions that were asked in July will be included in that report in around about November. And again, that report will be going to all 4 scrutiny committees. So it will be across the whole remit of the council rather than just yourselves, Chair.
Thanks, Sean. Is that all right, Brian?
That's great, thank you.
Welcome, Wendy. Then I've got Alan and then Councillor Dunn.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm late. Sorry.
All right now.
Thanks, Chair. I think Sean's kind of answered my question, which was about, given that we're into a potential spike in the northeast and particular areas in the northeast, Newcastle, etc. So I presume, Sean, that report in November will be updating us.
Yes, that's correct. So it will just be a further update on the information previously given, hopefully covering a lot of the issues that members raised at that time, but as you say, giving an update on the current position as it would be.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Dunn.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the last page of the minutes, it was actually your summing up, Councillor Reid, and you had made mention of the possible incorporation of a COVID-19 box on committee reports. I'm just wondering what progress was made with that.
As far as I remember, Councillor Dunn, it was poo-pooed by everybody, and I was told not to be so silly and never put another suggestion forward. I seem to remember, but I still think it's a good idea. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Right. So, other than that, we agreed to sign that I sign the minutes as a true record. Yes. Everybody's agreeing. That's good. So we're now going over to item 5, which is the overview, and 5.1 is fly tipping. And I think how we're going to do this, Mr. Jones is going to give us kind of the overview, and then Mr. Gregg is going to answer all of our questions. So over to you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So what I'd like to do is just give a run through as to the background in terms of how the services are performing and the background picture in terms of fly tipping generally. So as you can see in the report, there is a national trend, and there has been a national trend of an increase in fly tipping incidents for a number of years now. And that is apparent in Northumberland as well. And in the last couple of years, that has continued to increase within the county despite our best endeavours. So at the present time, the trend has increased still further. So that's a 34% increase on the previous number of incidents compared to the last financial year. I have to say, in relation to that, Northumberland as a county overall is still at the low end in terms of overall fly tipping numbers, but clearly any fly tipping is a problem, and it's something that we're not complacent about. There are a few key issues that I think is worth noting. The first one is that we have undertaken a detailed analysis of the type and nature of materials that are fly tipped, the locations that the fly tipped in. And what that's demonstrated is that the majority and the highest prevalence of fly tipping activity is in urban areas, it is in back lanes, and it is small amounts. So it's bags, small car boot, and it is predominantly just general household waste and items of furniture and things such as that. All of those items of fly tipping that are the most prevalent forms are things that A, should go in your bin free of charge, can be taken to a household waste centre where we have an excellent network and geographic coverage of those across the county free of charge, or they can be taken through our bulky waste collection service, for which there are charges that do apply. When we've looked at the actual detail of and some of the causation, we have came to the conclusion that basically there hasn't been any fundamental changes in our refuse collection waste management services that correlate with the increase in incidents of fly tipping. So we haven't undertaken any significant changes to our services. I think the last change in terms of bringing in new charges was back in 2015, and that related to household waste sites and inert waste and rubble at those facilities. We aren't seeing a significant correlation between the number of fly tipping incidents and that type of material. So it is predominantly just general household waste in small volumes, and it is predominantly in two urban areas, in the Hurst area of Ashington and the Blythe, Coop and Key area, where the majority of the increase has occurred in recent years. Now, some of that will be down to improved reporting arrangements. Our staff and our cleansing staff now have handheld devices. We've got much more robust monitoring and reporting of any fly tipping incidents. So that is certainly one of the underlying issues as well. I think the other key issues are that, and it's one that members I'm sure will be well aware of, we haven't actually reduced any of our cleansing or enforcement staff. If anything, we've actually increased them over the past 18 months. And certainly in the Blythe and Ashington areas, and pretty much across the most of South East Northumberland, where we do have environmental partnerships with town councils in those locations, we have actually significantly increased the cleansing standards and the general environmental standards within those areas through that collaborative work with the town councils. And I think to a degree we are somewhat a victim of our own success, because in some of those locations where people are basically opening the back gate into the back lane and chucking stuff out into the back lane, because our cleansing arrangements are good, that material is getting taken away quickly. It's not lying around causing problems, and people think they can just open the door and chuck it out and the material's removed and there's no consequence. So that's one of the key issues that we're looking to address in terms of the education and enforcement activity that we're proposing, is to basically drive home the message that it isn't acceptable behaviour to do things such as that there are legitimate ways to get rid of your waste, that if you do just chuck it out into the back lane, there are consequences associated with that, and we'll be looking to increase the enforcement activity associated with that. To support that increased enforcement activity, we've already undertaken training of our key NEAT teams, so that whereas previously some of the professional enforcement teams in public protection were actually investigating pretty much every incident of fly tipping to do that initial check to see if there's any evidence that will lead to perpetrators, we're now having that work, that initial evidence gathering work, undertaken by our cleansing teams instead. That enables us to release those professional staff to focus on the higher level investigative work to try and bring perpetrators to account. So there is a detailed action plan that we've put forward as part of the report that's looking at a mixture of education and enforcement activity to work with the communities to try and improve the overall cleansing and standards and fly tipping enforcement activity in those areas. We have had some success already, that in terms of the increase in enforcement staff, we have been issuing fixed penalty notices. We have had seizures of vehicles. We do take a strong hand on this. We have had some issues clearly with COVID, and that certainly there has been some breaks in continuity recently in terms of some of our services. The household waste sites were closed for a short while, but all of those services are now back up and running. Our enforcement teams are back up and running, and that's what we're looking to do, is to take forward the action plan. So into the autumn of this year, we'll be increasing that enforcement, education and awareness raising activity, and particularly targeting as part of a wider activity, but also particularly targeting the two hotspot areas in Blyth and the Ashington area to tackle those particular issues where it's more prevalent than other areas. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you for that. Councillor Carty, and then Councillor Heppel.
Hiya, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Paul, as you know, are in the community centre around the Croft Ward and Blyth. We've just had new cameras put in, and so far they've only been in a few weeks, and there's been 2 fixed penalty notices given out to people who have been caught on the cameras. The thing is, Paul, people think they can just put the TVs out. They think the council are just going to take them away all the time, like you've said. So, yeah, you're right about re-educating people, but how are you going to get that re-education across to them people? How are you going to notify them people that it's just not all right to dump a TV outside the back gate or dump the rubbish outside of the back gate? Because that's what they're doing. We see it all the time there. How are you going to get that message across? You know, in a newspaper or in a leaflet drop or what? Thank you, Paul.
I think, Chair, I'll probably best answer that one if that's okay.
Yeah, fine. And welcome, Rupert.
Okay, so I think the way we intend to get
Sorry about that, Chairman.
That's no problem.
The way we intend to get that message across is sort of split into 2. The answer to that, really, Councillor Carty. The first is that the general communication messages that we'll be promoting across the whole county will hopefully reinforce what isn't appropriate and what the potential implications are of not doing the right thing. But specifically in the area you've just discussed and in the Hurst, the enforcement team are developing some sort of multi-week action events. And the way that we've initially decided that we'll be breaking those events down is that we will have a week of action where we will sort of flood the street with people in tabards, enforcement staff and my staff, and undertake some door knocking activity, pushing some information around in terms of leaflets, again with all of those messages, positive messages to start with, in terms of reminding people what the responsibilities are and what's the appropriate way to dispose of that rubbish. And once we've done that, we'll then be going back in a subsequent week, probably 2 or 3 weeks later, to then start to take less of an educational message and more of an enforcement message. So that's the general thing for the approach and how we intend to try and get that across.
Thanks for that, Greg. Alan Heppel?
Sorry, Chair.
All right.
I'm having problems with this computer. Since we changed over, it's been a nightmare. Never mind. I've got 2 or 3 comments or questions, if you like. You're laughing there, Chair. I think you experience the same issues.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, 2 or 3 sort of questions. One is that you mentioned on the recommendations there's no link between the increase in fly tipping and the increase in charges, etc. It's interesting, though. I don't know why there isn't a comment on this in this report, but it's interesting that the 2 areas of the worst in the county, the Hurst and the Croft ward, are the ones, if you look at deprivation indices, are probably the worst in the county. And there's got to be, I would have thought there's got to be a link there between that kind of the deprivation within those 2 wards and the ability to pay charges. I just don't understand why there isn't that link. That's the first question. The second one is in relation to this report doesn't go up to, it just goes up to March 2020. I mean, the information's really good, I have to say. The report's very detailed, very comprehensive. You know, so well done on that one. Not sure I understood all the stats at the end on the appendices, but never mind. But I think in terms of since March, obviously, we've had COVID. And I just wonder if I know the report doesn't cover that, but there must have been an increase in kind of fly tipping, etc., in that period, particularly as the sites were closed down. But I think my concern is about that kind of link between the kind of the most deprived wards in the county in relationship to charges. The other issue, I think you're right, it is a behavioural problem, as Councillor Carty and others have said. I think there is a behavioural problem, so education is quite important. But I think the other aspect is got to be about how you utilise partners within the council and elsewhere to tackle the issue. So, for example, you've got housing officers looking at estates almost every day of the week, and they can make a useful contribution, I guess, in terms of tackling the issue, both in terms of prevention and education, I would have thought. I don't know if that's an area you've explored, but it's worth thinking about, I guess. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to come back on that, gents, and then we'll get...
Yeah, I think if I can just pick up the first one about the deprivation one. What we're saying, Councillor Heppel, is that where we've increased charges, where we've developed charges for the first time, that the evidence that we have in terms of the rate of fly tipping and also the locations where fly tipping occurs and the materials that have been fly tipped don't relate and correlate to those changes in policy. So that's what we're saying. There isn't a correlation between those changes in policy and fly tipping activity. I think it's probably fair to say that there's always been and there will continue to be a link between socio-economic groupings and some of that, because clearly if you're in a more deprived household, you have other pressures on you, and dealing with your waste in a most effective manner isn't possibly the highest thing on your agenda. So I think we haven't stated that there isn't a link between the socio-economic aspects. That's not something that we've had a close review of, but something that we can certainly. I think generally it is accepted that the lower down you are in terms of those socio-economic groupings, the higher the prevalence of fly tipping just generally as a baseline standard. Yeah.
Greg, did you want to add anything to that before I bring Brian in? Got you, Christine.
Yeah, just in terms of the other main part of that question from Councillor Heppel was around the figures since the end of the last financial year and the impact of COVID. So we have been tracking that operationally throughout this year. And when lockdown first came in and the household waste sites closed, we're obviously monitoring that really carefully. And if you look at the figures for 1920, 5,040, I think that equates to 96 a week on average, fly tips a week. And when lockdown was in, we were averaging at the early hundreds, 105, 106 a week in that sort of region. But certainly in the last few weeks, if I look from the beginning of August, numbers have actually come down now. So we're looking at a weekly average since the beginning of August of 81 a week. So we're now slipping under last year's average, but we were slightly above it during lockdown. But it didn't fluctuate as much as we thought it would.
Okay, and Brian, and then Christine Dunbar. Microphone, Brian.
Apologies, I was on my notes before I was wanting to talk. Just a couple of questions and a couple of comments more than anything else. Yes, I would definitely 100% say you're a victim of your own success on this, but your success is a partnership as well. And the partnerships come from, dare I say, the parish and town councils that put money into their budgets of partnership deals with you. You know, I think somewhere along the line that there has to be a report that says, well, if the Ashton or the Blythe councils didn't put money into this scheme, how would we react to that? So there's the other flip of the coin that says, what happens if? But it's been really good that they're working in partnerships. I do believe that that the idea of putting leaflets out there, and I think they've got to be directional leaflets in those areas of Blythe and Ashton, Hurst, and where it is, and Blythe. So the reality is that can't just be a one-off leaflet. It's got to be a gradual leaflet drop because it's a small area. You're not looking at the whole of Ashton. You're not looking at the whole of Blythe. So where your issues are, I think it should be a roll-off, even if it's every 6 months, to put a leaflet drop down with information coming back to, you know, all of the comments that were mentioned before. Enforcement for me is a massive thing. You know, once we get, if we actually catch somebody fly tipping, that we need to get that message out on those leaflets. We also need to make residents aware that using the fact of third party, dare I say, the man in the white van or a pickup picks up the rubbish and then they throw that rubbish away. So for example, if it was my rubbish, they throw it away, it's classed as fly tipping, I'm responsible for that. So it's putting that responsibility back to the people who have paid people to take them away on their behalf. The other thing was mentioned was around covert cameras. Now I know that Ashton Town Council have bought 2 covert cameras, which they've handed over to NCC enforcement teams. Now, I would like to see a little bit more feedback on that, not the detail, but to see how positive they are working within our communities. And I know that the chair and I, before all of this, we had a brief discussion and we discussed around traffic management. It's the fact that people can't get readily accessible to the disposal points, is that maybe causing the idea of saying, well, I'm not going to stand in the queue here for half an hour or 40 minutes. I'm just going to go back and just drop it off wherever I can. So, you know, that there in itself is an issue. Do you know what I mean? So, and I know that there's restrictions there. And I know the chair has maybe got a few more comments that he wants to make on that. But I think that that's a massive issue as well, to take half an hour out of your day to park to try and get rid of any bits of small rubbish you've got. Thank you for that, Chair. Thank you.
No problem. Either officer want to come back on that before I bring Councillor Dunbar in?
If I can, Chair, I think quite a lot to go out there, so I'll try and sort of be quick. I absolutely endorse Councillor's comments around the success of the partnerships being driven by the town councils and the investment they make into those improvements, and I'd completely echo those thoughts. Similarly, the comments about the leaflet drop and the activity not being a one-off, I think is really important. And if you reference the action plan in there, you'll see that the awareness and enforcement programs are described as multi-week operations, because we intend to do that over a period of time and then evaluate and go again. So that will certainly be something that we do on a more regular basis. And the white van man type implications that the councillor described, again, that is definitely part of the overall message that we're pushing out to make people aware of both their responsibilities and the potential implications. I think the points around the covert cameras and the enforcement, certainly this is an action plan of two halves really, and it was an action plan we were ready to launch just before COVID. So you'll see from all of the dates the increase in the enforcement capacity and all the actions around how we do that were all undertaken prior to COVID, and the second phase in terms of the action days was then due to come straight after. But that's why there's such a gap between those increase in the enforcement capacity actions and the others. And then the last point on access to the disposal points and the waiting times, we've been doing some analysis on the numbers of vehicles. A couple of the busier sites, bedside being the one closest to those hotspot areas, and we are now starting to see the numbers of visits slightly decreasing, and our contractors have also managed to increase the maximum number of vehicles on site at any one time. So we are currently undertaking a review of those traffic management arrangements, and we're actually quite hopeful that we'll be able to pull some of those traffic management arrangements off in the near future.
Okay, Councillor Gallagher, yeah. No. Councillor Dunbar.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report, and I have noticed the quick removal of fly tipping within a short period of time, and that's really good. What I really wanted, which isn't in the report, there's no mention of any concessions. Are there still concessions in place for people on benefits to get some relief? Have they been reduced? Have they been removed? And if they have, could this be one of the factors for the increased fly tipping?
Okay, gents, so Greg, do you want to answer that? Did you catch that?
Yeah, sorry, the audio went out in one of my earpieces there. I think it was a question about concessions, but I missed half of it, Chair.
And whether the
I can pick that up in Greg's absence. That's okay. So there are still concessions on the bulky waste collection service, whereby anyone that receives there's quite a long list of eligibility criteria in terms of the different types of benefit that people would qualify for. But basically, you get a 25% reduction in relation to the standard charge, and that's across all of the different categories of material. There aren't any concessions on the household waste centre inert waste charges. They are just a pay-as-you-throw arrangement, and that's because there's no statutory obligation for the council to actually receive that material. So we're trying to avoid the subsidy in doing that service and reduce the subsidy that we do still provide for that. I think the other point, which was just in the general one about the reducing and making the services available, we do provide a broad range of services across our waste teams, and particularly for people that might have difficulties in terms of accessing, even pulling their own bins out. We do provide assisted collections across the piece for that. So, but if there are things that are causing people problems, we'll more than happily review that again and see what the issues are and try and find some solutions to that.
Thank you. Is that all right, Councillor Dunbar? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got to agree with Paul when he says the NEAT team are really good at picking items up quite quickly, and we have been a victim of our own success on this. It's a big problem within my ward for white goods, particularly being shoved out in the back street. I'm just wondering, I know the educational leaflets and things are fine, but at the point of these items being picked up, is there some sort of letter that could be put through the letterbox at the offending property?
If we knew what or where the offending property was,
or
we would,
within a radius of it, say, or even stuck on, if it was a big fridge freezer, can you stick a big poster on it saying, you're not supposed to be doing this before it's actually picked up? I don't know.
I think that
we don't target the right people some of the time. And the other question was, is there any update on how provision of PACE interviews? Have we got a property for that yet?
Yeah, so in terms of picking things up quickly, thank you for your comments on that. The putting a sticker on the item, I think, would entail a second visit, so it's not something we'd want to do, but that general principle of trying to communicate to that surrounding area that that's the wrong thing to do is absolutely the approach that we want to take. Not quite sure that how you've outlined we could do that is the right way, but we do need to think about how we do that. We'll be piloting that in the Hurst and in Coop and Key, but once we have hopefully, landed on a process that works and starts to reduce fly tipping numbers, and we will look into other areas and see if we can do similar schemes Councillor Dunn.
Okay, excellent. Is that all right, Councillor Dunn? Yeah.
Yes, I was just wanting an update on whether there was a facility for doing the PACE interviews yet.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, they've found a solution to that.
Excellent, well done. Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things, one of the questions that I forgot to ask was how do we connect with landlords? I can only speak for the Hurst because I've got a little bit of knowledge about the Hurst and Ashington, and it's probably similar to Blythe, where there's a high turnover of rented properties. And I can't for the one of me understand how somebody goes through as many 3-piece suites or washing machines or cookers. But maybe one of the answers are that if somebody moves into a new rented property and there's an old certainly cooker, whatever else there, they're not, and it's not theirs, it's from the previous tenant, are they throwing them outside and just moving their stuff in? So if there's a high turnover of tenancy within those areas, there's a high level of education to say, look, you've took the property on, but it's still your responsibility to get rid of the stuff that's in that property. And I think working with, dare I say, the landlords, and dare I say the people that rent the properties out in respect of estate agents, that let me get the message out that way. And you may find that there might not be as many white goods there, especially being put out on the back streets.
Yeah, I think, Councillor, the connection with the landlords is something that we've got, but we could always improve on. And when we're looking at the two hotspot areas, I think the answer to your question is slightly different for both areas. Where there is a sort of registered landlord in terms of its advance for the Hurst, for most of the properties there, they're excellent at not putting out items that previous tenants have left behind, and they've got an effective void process so that they can remove all that rubbish and dispose of it efficiently and legally. In the Coop and Key area, landlords are predominantly private landlords there, so we don't have that same relationship because it's not just one cohesive body that's got the majority of properties. So it is more of a challenge in that area than it is in Hurst.
Thanks for that, Greg. Before I bring Councillor Heplin, I've noticed that Councillor Sanderson's joined us. I don't know whether he wanted to say anything at this point, or was he content just to listen?
Good afternoon. I just hope you're being nice to Greg, are you?
We are.
That's fine then.
Okay, in that case, Councillor Heppel.
Is that an invitation not to be nice? Is it? No, I would always be nice to officers, Chairman. The landlord question was one I had, which Brian's quite rightly raised. So I just want to make one suggestion. I mean, as a former kind of housing officer, I know how difficult it can be in terms of tackling that behavioural problem within areas of multiple deprivation. So can I suggest that maybe one of the things into your education plan or communications plan, I think it's probably key that you talk to the local member or members and possibly any community groups, because I think they can have a different view, a different perspective on how that approach could be improved. I think it could be useful to do that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Heppel. I think that's probably a good idea, but I don't know how we would. Or Mr. Jones, is Mr. Jones happy to accept that? then incorporate in whatever plan he's got, or do we need to add a recommendation here?
Norman,
Yeah, I think.
sorry, as
Sorry.
part of the communications plan development, we are looking to have that dialogue with. It's a societal issue at the end of the day, and we have to involve the whole of society in trying to resolve that. So that includes local councillors, the town councils, community associations, the landlords, registered social landlords. You know, it's a community-wide problem. We need to engage as actively as we can to help support that.
So is Councillor Heppel willing to accept that's how it's going to be done? Yes, he is. Excellent. Anyone else got any questions who would like to ask before I just have my sixpenny worth, and then we shall move on. So first of all, there are the recommendations in the report, which none of us have spoken against it. So I guess we're willing to accept all of that, with the addition of what Councillor Heppel's asked for, which has been accepted by the officers, that we try and, you know, take a community approach to this. I don't see anybody shaking their head in rejection of that. I was just wondering, in the report, it seems to be this problem goes back. I was on Blythe Valley Borough Council for 14 years, however long it was, and those areas were a problem then. So nothing seems to have changed, and I was just wondering whether we get repeat offenders. You know, do we find somebody and then discover we have to find them again, or do we warn somebody? Do we have to warn, you know, or is there a group of people that is creating sort of 10 or 15% of this just because they don't want to be part of the, you know, the society in which we live in, and this is an easy way of them just to, you know, reject it, basically. That was one question. And as far as promoting your intention is to continually remind people, but from what we see, most of the problem is just in those two places. So is it best just to concentrate the vast resource, you know, the vast amount of resources we've got, just keep banging away in there? Or do you think by not doing stuff elsewhere, it'll create a problem somewhere else, perhaps? And then all of the other questions I had have sadly, for me, been answered in the excellent thing at the back, which is the analysis of the operation analysis with the graphs and the whole thing. It's a really, you know, it's a really good signpost, and you've really, you know, written about what's required. So, you know, well done on that. Councillor Carty.
Thank you, Chair. It's just something that you've just said there about them two areas being the particular hotspots, and we know they are, right? There's no ifs and buts about it. But it is creeping into other areas, though. You know, it's creeping into my ward, the fly tipping. Not as much as the Croft ward, but we do have a lot of transient community, and they move on and whatever. Like you say, when new people come into landlord houses, and then they move on, and there's a settee in the lane or a mattress. You go down the back lanes, and there's always a mattress in the back lane. So I do think it is creeping across all of the communities. So I would not like to see them two areas solely concentrated on. I think we need to keep nipping away at the other ones as well, to be fair.
I think that's what I said, you know, but if we need, and if it turns out there was starting to get trouble in Hexham, you'd have to start putting resource into that too. I just wanted to, I've just seen some of the things I've written down. Mr. Jones said, you know, collection was free of charge. Well, it's not. You know, it might be free at the point of delivery, but somebody's paying for it. You know, all of us are paying for it. So I don't know whether we should, on these leaflets, and I don't know whether people would care, you know, whether the people who are fly tipping are actually bothered that it's costing the rest of us money to collect. But if we knew how much that was, and we could put that on a leaflet and say, do you realise that this, you know, it costs the residents of Northumberland, I don't know, 400,000 a year or whatever it is, then, you know, that might be impactful on people saying, well, hold on a minute, that's, you know, if it's not the person that's dropping it, but the person that sees it, thinks, well, hold on a minute, that's, you know, that's adding forward however much it is to the whole bill. You know, what else could we be spending that on instead of sending wagons around picking up after people? And the only other thing I was going to say was, is there a way of getting a leaflet in with a council tax bill? I know we stick other stuff in with the bill, you know, just a reminder, or whether you can postcode that so some of them would get a leaflet about fly tipping and others wouldn't, or whether you think that's, you know, a waste of time because people, you know, just don't open that bill, they just chuck it out anyway. So I will just move the recommendations. I'm sure the officers are going to come back and make comment, and Councillor Heppel wants to come back in, but I'm just assuming that we can accept the recommendations as written and move it on to the Cabinet, who will presumably endorse it. So would either of the officers like to come back now, and then we'll have Councillor Heppel in.
Greg, do you want to pick up the points of detail, and I'll just cover the general one about the repeat areas?
Yeah, okay, I'll leave that one for you then. So in terms of some of the detail there, the costs of fly tipping will form part of the wider communication strategy, but is unlikely to feature in the leaflet. And what we felt with the leaflets is that a mass shot of leafleting isn't always effective. So we very much want to balance the approach we take to doing that by using that to reinforce the door-to-door activity that we'll be doing in those hotspot areas, and then potentially subsequent areas as well. But then rely on the more generic messaging for everybody else rather than mail shot everywhere else. I think that sort of general point as well, Chair, around you know, do we focus all of our time on those hotspot areas, or do we need to still promote those messages in other areas to prevent them from becoming the same? I do feel that, you know, we do need to promote those messages across the whole county. The fly tipping has gone up. Almost all of the increase is predominantly in these two areas, but it doesn't mean that there aren't issues in other areas that we need to help local communities tackle. Over to you then, Paul.
Yeah, I think in terms of the repeat areas and repeat offenders comments, Chair, I think on the repeat areas ones, that clearly one of the activities we do is to map and to look at the locations where fly tipping incidents occur. And as you would expect, a lot of those are around the urban fringe, particularly in the southeast of the county, but also in the urban fringe around some of the market towns, as people, you know, basically go out into quieter lanes and things such as that. And in the hotspot areas, those hotspot areas have been problematic for many years. And that's primarily because of the tenure, the nature of the properties, the tenure of the properties, and, you know, the socio-economics of the areas generally that all have a higher prevalence of fly tipping activity. So those are long-standing issues, and it is a case of education and enforcement tackling those issues fundamentally, because with high turnover in those areas, it's new occupants all the time. So it's trying to get that message and to continue to drip feed that message right through, and to set those standards within those communities as a whole, and to work with the wider community to help support that. In terms of repeat offenders, we don't get a great deal of repeat offenders in terms of the low level, like fly tipping, littering type activity that people, once to get the fingers burned on that, tend to learn the lesson. What I would say though is they have to separate that type of black sack out of the backyard type activity with the larger scale fly tipping, white van man and upwards. And that clearly is repeat offenders. It's people that are doing that as a form of business, albeit an illegitimate business. And that is something that, again, our enforcement teams actively tackle to covert surveillance cameras, working with the Environment Agency and other law enforcement bodies to tackle those, for want of a better word, organised criminal activities on a much larger scale, which do go on in the county and in Tyne and Wear as well.
Yeah, excellent. Councillor Heppel?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just thought of a possible other suggestion I could make. And it comes back to my time when I was working in housing. When we dealt with serious ASB, antisocial behaviour, we often publicised the results of that, including sometimes naming the offender. That was allowed from a legal point of view. So in terms of go back to your comms plan, your leaflets, particularly in those 2 hotspot areas, is it worth thinking about having a higher profile on enforcement? So, for example, you've had 28 statutory notices, 27 last year. Those kind of things are quite important, I think, to publicise in terms of particularly those areas and more widely. And I think that at the very least to give reassurance to the general public that you are doing something as a council to tackle this problem. Just a suggestion, Chair.
Okay, I think that's part of what was be going on anyway. I don't think there's, I don't think we shy away from it, but it's, sometimes the commitment to take action is, is quite considerable really for the level of the offence. But I would always say it's, what's right's right. You've got to do it. If you can prove it, it doesn't matter whether it's going to cost the council more. You should do it. I don't know whether the officers want to add to that at all.
Yeah, I think summarising some of that activity, some of the smaller enforcement events would be something that I'll take away and consider with colleagues in enforcement, but certainly where we have notable successes in enforcement, like the example that is in the report, we have had quite a few positive press pieces where the papers have covered quite well, the van being crushed as the example. So we do always try and push those bigger examples forward, and sometimes papers do pick up on them.
Yeah, if we didn't do anything, would things deteriorate very quickly, do you think? Do you think it would become intolerable, or do you think it would kind of just level off if we didn't enforce, we didn't clear up fly tipping, if we left it, would it escalate, do you think?
If I can come in on that one, Chair, there was a trial undertaken by a number of authorities that involved Tidy Britain Group a few years ago, and we actually undertook and participated in that within the Ashington area, where basically we didn't clean one side of Ashington High Street over a certain period, and we did cleanse the other. And believe you me, it's surprising how noticeable it is very quickly in terms of behaviours and the accumulations of waste, and people really, really do notice it very quickly that things are going wrong.
Yeah, perhaps at some point then we should try that in these hotspots. Just say, well, we're going to leave it for 6 months or 3 months or whatever, and you're going to see how bad it is. So then you're going to have to get a grip.
I understand the sentiment, but I don't think that would be fair on those residents that are good. It's the minority that are impacting the majority. Yeah.
Brian, you wanted to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. I've worked with Councillor Glenn Sanderson over a number of years around these issues, and a lot of it is round about education, and it's more touching on enforcement. But I do like the idea of, I agree with you to a certain degree that the leaflets work and then they don't work. But I think of a door knock, or if we see on a regular basis that you've got officers wandering around that ward taking notes, then it becomes a message that people aren't going to be putting up with this anymore. And it's for the points that Councillor Heppel said about it's the irresponsible ones that we need to catch, and we have to make sure that the message gets out that it's not acceptable for them to do what they do. And I do believe it's a high turnover of tenancies. They give the highest percentage. So thank you, Chair. Thanks for getting us back in.
Excellent, no problem at all. Right then, I think I'm just going to be able to draw this to a close. I don't see anyone else wishing to speak unless Councillor Sanderson wanted to add anything.
Well, that's kind of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, not really. Just other than to say, I hope you can see that we are taking this seriously. This and other litter clearing costs us in excess of £3.5 million, I think it is, Greg, something like that, every year. And I always say to people, just imagine what we could do if we had £3.5 million to spend on frontline stuff. So we do get that message across. Actually, it means a lot that Ashington Town Council, for example, are helping us. Blythe will as well, and local members as well on the ground. All the help we can get would be much appreciated. And thank you very much for discussing it today.
Well, as the popular phrase is, we're all in it together now. So you know, when we are, and this has been a problem forever. You know, I've been a councillor now for 30 odd years, and I think we talked about this on the first council meeting I ever attended. So you know, it was in the same area as well. So thank you all for that. We agree the recommendations, and the officer have accepted what Councillor Heppel wanted to add to it. So we shall then move on to the next thing on the agenda, which is item 6, which is a report of the scrutiny coordinator, and that means we have Sean back.
Yeah, a quick turnaround to the next meeting, Chair. The next meeting's on the 7th of October, so we're going back to the original timetable of meetings. We have 3 items for that agenda. The Fire and Rescue Service Improvement Plan. Paul Head is going to come to talk to you about that. Customer services feedback, which it used to be called the old complaints report, but it's more customer services focused now. And we're just waiting for confirmation about whether or not we'll get the roadside glass collection scheme report. Hope I said it right that time, Chair. Further to the response I gave to members earlier when we talked about the minutes, I should have also said that COVID-19 updates is a standing item on the Health and Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee. They're having regular updates, so members will be welcome to view those meetings. I think the next one's on Monday at 10 o'clock. And of course, the COVID position is constantly changing. So whilst that indicated that we probably might get a report in November, goodness knows where we might be then. So, but as things stand, on the 20th of October, we do have the LTP report and report on seasonal grounds maintenance. Just on that seasonal grounds maintenance report, that would be a report that would normally go to the local area councils, but I think because of the current situation, again, with COVID, that issue is being picked up by scrutiny.
Okay, excellent. Any comment on that? Councillor Heppel and then Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the forward plan here, particularly on terms of reference, and I haven't come across this one. Don't know why I haven't, but I've only been on the committee a short time, as you know. It's got the first point, maintain an overview of the management agreements in relation to the council and Active Northumberland, etc. I've not seen anything. I'm not wondering what that's about. I understand what a management agreement is, but what's this committee's role in that? And the other point I think is in terms of issues to be timetable, it's got performance and enforcement. We've just seen a kind of performance and enforcement report on fly tipping, which is really good. So it's got no details on that. I just wondered what that was about. Yeah,
I'm in discussions with the business chair about how the committee is going to deal with the Active Northumberland report, and hopefully I'll be able to timetable that in shortly. Performance is a report that the committee received annually, and it was about performance across all of the whole remit of the committee, not just local services. So that's an annual report that is scheduled in February. The enforcement report, again, that was something that came out of the briefings we had with the executive director, and again, that's enforcement across all of the remit of the committee. So it's we talked about fly tipping today, but it could be dog fouling, it could be car parking, it could be anything. So I think there'll be an element of fly tipping enforcement as part of that report when it comes through. But as you can see, we've got a reasonably full programme for the next 2 meetings, potentially with COVID coming through. So they're issues that we're going to be pulling down towards the end of the year and the beginning of the next calendar year, Chair.
Thank you. Brian?
Thank you, Chair. Been brought to my attention county-wide that there is a lot of antisocial behaviour happening around car parks, especially public car parks. And I'm mindful, I've just looked at the diary, the next time we would probably have a meaningful talk would be the 4th of March. The other concern was in these car parks that there's a lot of these gas cylinders or canisters that the young kids are using Northumberland wide. And I'm just thinking, is this maybe a conversation we can have in scrutiny prior towards the dark nights coming in to deal with the issues and the problems?
Well, that'll be something for the chairman's group.
I think that's something else that I should have mentioned as well, Chair. I mean, clearly we need a chairman's group. Obviously, we've got to get next week's council out the way, but hopefully we'll have a chairman's group before the end of October. And I think we need to pick up. There's obviously some issues that would normally be considered by the local area councils, and I think there are issues that we need to pick up in scrutiny. I think that's one of those items, Chair.
So, chairman's group first, Brian. Is that all right? Yeah, excellent. Well, just before my clock strikes 3, I shall call the meeting to an end. There is no urgent business. I look forward to seeing you all again at our special council next week. Take care.